Some aspects of this subject simply need to be taught. We call that critical content for learning. We know very clearly and very deeply that teachers are good at this stuff. They're good at pedagogy. They know how to make a particular content accessible. And so we don't overload them with pedagogy. We are challenged to provide a curriculum where every student, every child can feel that they can take part. Every time we walk into a classroom as a religious educator, we're taking the risk of education, but it's a risk very well worth taking.
Welcome back to the Flourishing Podcast. Today we've got a very special episode whereby we are going to unpack the new RE curriculum and discuss its ongoing development. Today I'm joined by three special guests where we're going to look at how the RE curriculum has been developed, what its early implementation has been like, and how the key contributors to that, including the writers, have looked to compose the curriculum. And we're going to examine how the overarching philosophy of the curriculum itself, the distinctions between primary and secondary, and the lessons emerging from our initial trials in our Max schools. So I am joined by Professor Kath Engebretson, and I don't want to get any of this wrong, Kath, so I'm going to read from the script here, but Professor in Catholic Education Australia for more than 35 years, amazing experience, served as the head of religious education in various Catholic secondary schools, and in the School of Religious Education at ACU, Australian Catholic University, for 17 years.
Yes.
Yeah. Time flies?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Of course, you have a PhD on needs and teacher education for religious education.
Yes.
And obviously that's stood you in good stead composing this RE curriculum, I'm sure. A number of publications in numerous fields, textbooks to know, worship and love.
Yes.
And your latest academic book published by Bloomsbury, London, Catholic Schools and the Future of the Church.
That's right. Yes.
There we go. Got it all right. Thank goodness for that. So welcome, Kath.
Thank you very much.
And alongside Kath, we have Carl Hode. Carl is our project lead religious education at Max. And alongside Carl, it's a very special episode where our table is full today. We're joined by James O'Brien, who is the RE curriculum writer for secondary. So a range of expertise here. And so that's going to help us unpack the curriculum as we discuss that together.
Great.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Kath, I'm going to start with you
Sure.
as kind of the lead surrounding this RE curriculum development. Can we start a really basic question? Why the need for a new curriculum now?
Okay, well, I suppose the short answer to that is that it's time. It's actually been 18 years since we had a new religious education curriculum in this archdiocese that was approved by the Archbishop. So over the course of Catholic education in this archdiocese, if we look back over the history, we'll see that there are waves of different kinds of methodologies, beginning with first settlement, a rote learning methodology, then into the 1960s, the Australian bishops combined to promote a series of textbooks called My Way to God, which were used all over Australian Catholic schools. Then into the 60s with the Second Vatican Council, a new sort of understanding or recognition of something called natural revelation, which pointed to human experience as being a place where God meets people. And so we had for a long time a methodology called a life experience approach, which began with the student's experience and moved from there into knowledge about the church and tradition. We had that for 20 years, more than 20 years. Then in the middle 90s, with the new Archbishop, we began to develop an archdiocesan series of religious education textbooks, and that's still very much in existence and still going, the To Know, Worship and Love, which is used all across Australia. We're very proud of that here in Melbourne. Then, of course, 2008, there was developed a curriculum around that called Coming to Know, Worship and Love. Now, that was the last time that we had a new curriculum. So now, since then, we have really a bit of a patchwork about how religious education is treated in schools. It might be that curriculum. It might be something called pedagogy of encounter. It might be a school-based curriculum. It might be something based around the charism of the school. But in general, we've faced a situation where there's no real coherence or no real commonality around the way the subject is taught. So it really is high time that, we have a new a new archbishop directed religious education curriculum.
Lovely. Yeah. Nice little history there of kind of the transformation of the curriculum.
Yeah.
I suppose, and we can dive into the primary, secondary elements a bit later, but in a real generalist sense, what are some of the key changes then? You hint at the fact there it's a bit more streamlined. Hopefully we're going to remove some of the inconsistencies across schools.
Absolutely. There are sort of all the words we use all the time that we've developed a model of curriculum that is coherent. Coherent curriculum has been used in a number of different disciplines, but not, as far as we know, in religious education before. So in a coherent curriculum, things are sequenced logically. There are learning progressions. Learning is cumulative from year to year. And another thing we always say, in a coherent curriculum, the curriculum is ambitious for the knowledge of students. We don't want to water it down. We want to acknowledge students as competent learners. And so in this new curriculum, most teachers will find that there's more content in the curriculum than they have been used to.
So kind of complete units of work.
Absolutely.
Moving away from previously, I think, theological statements.
Yes. There's a tendency across religious education curricula across Australia to provide teachers with a range of sort of theological statements, which they then have to deconstruct and manage then into a curriculum that might be taught in the school. Now, teachers are time-pressed. Religious education, there has been a shortage of religious education teachers over the last 10 years or so. What we're trying to do is to develop entire units of work that the teacher can take up this particular unit and then deconstruct that so that to work it out into X number of lessons in their school. Yep. So across each year level, we have 8 full units of work for the teachers to use.
Okay. And so it's adaptable and can suit the needs of the timelines of the schools and what they're working with in?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. We want to give the teachers as much curriculum support as we possibly can.
Lovely. And then again, I suppose in that general sense, we've got these companion documents that support, I suppose, the creation of this curriculum, our vision for instruction, and it's kind of guidance around the structure of lessons.
Yes.
How's that impacted your design?
Well, we've taken the vision for instruction on board, absolutely. It has been reasonably unusual to use a method called direct teaching or explicit teaching in religious education. And yet, being aware of the gaps in students' knowledge, it became very clear to us that there's certain areas of content that children simply need to be taught.
Sure.
It's outside the realm of their experience. We can't relate it to any particular part of their experience. And just as in many other subjects, some aspects of this subject simply need to be taught.
Sure.
And so we call that critical content for learning. Mm-hmm. And we provide that critical content for learning for the teachers in each one of the units that we write.
Yeah, I guess that adds to the ease of teaching it, makes it a lot more simplistic to know what needs to be taught, how it needs to be taught.
Yes, I've had a long time developing religious education curricula. I spent many years training pre-service teachers who were going into our schools to teach religious education. So a big part of that work was helping them to become comfortable in developing units of work themselves. Sure. And then a lot of time going out to schools, of course, watching them give demonstration lessons, etc.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so all that's filtering into this design.
Yes.
And when you revamp a curriculum, I think it's only natural that there can be misinterpretation of it or misunderstandings initially.
Yes, misunderstandings. I'd say rather more of fear, a certain fear that this might be something that's going to cause me a lot of trouble or a lot of time that I don't have, or I'm not going to be up to it, my knowledge is not going to be up to it, etc. But as Kyle will explain in some detail, we've been on a journey of piloting and trialling the units really from the beginning. And so we're finding that the initial fears of teachers can be easily allayed. Once they try the unit, bring it into their context in their school, then they can always come back to us and say, oh, look, it took too long, or I couldn't do this part. But we're always there to help them to get over those issues.
Sure.
And, we're very pleased to say that in general, the reception through the trialling has been extremely positive.
Amazing. I'll come to you now then, Carl. So this idea that we've got this kind of sequential curriculum, it year to year, is that kind of development from primary all the way through to secondary. What does that mean, and how's that going to feel for our teachers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in designing the curriculum, Kath and James, and also Marsha van Keilenberg, who's a primary curriculum writer, they're being really careful to sequence the knowledge from one year to the next to prepare students for what's coming up, to give them that really solid foundation. In primary school, it's really obvious, the units of work in primary school, they follow the liturgical year. So when Lent's on, students are learning about Lent. When Easter's on, they're learning about Easter. But as you go up from foundation to year 6 in primary school, because Kath and Marsha are looking so carefully at what are the cognitive outcomes, what are the affective outcomes, that what students are learning in foundation about Lent, they might be learning, say, the story about Jesus' time in the desert. By the time they get to year 6, it's not the 7th retelling of that story. Actually, we've developed that sense of preparation and what is Lent really about in year 6, to the point where now we're talking about what are options for social justice and almsgiving in year 6, and where can we do social justice outreach in year 6 in my community. And the same with sacraments as well. So sacramental programs in primary school are a big focus. And so as early on as year 2, we're preparing students to understand, the sacraments that they might choose to enter into. It's up to them and their families whether they want to be part of it. It's a big piece of the puzzle, is religious freedom for students as well to say, yes, I want to be part of this. But to build the ongoing sense of sacramentality from grade 2, 3, 4, out to 6, and alongside that, learning about this story that they're hearing.
Yeah, sure. And I suppose you hint there at this idea. There's the weakness in teaching in the perspective that retrieval practice is really simplistic and you just keep repeating the same topic or content every now and then. But in reality, that real quality kind of spaced retrieval really builds on the knowledge.
Yeah.
Was that difficult to construct then and craft?
It's difficult to keep track of in some sense because you've got a lot of curriculum to watch over. And so making sure that you're carefully, reviewing what did we do last year for Lent? What are we doing this year for Lent? What are we going to do next year for Lent? What are they learning in year 5 that's going to help me set them up for confirmation in year 6? That's a difficult task in a sense of you're trying to keep your eye across a really big curriculum as you go, but it's really crucial. Kath and Marsha have been following that process very, very carefully. And as they go along and as they get feedback from schools as well about what students might need coming up or what they could use next time, they're planning ahead for years 3, 4 and 5, saying, okay, we're going to fill that gap in before they need it when they hit it in year 6.
And so you're really helping teachers, even those that maybe don't have as strong content knowledge, to really just be able to jump in and teach what's required.
Yeah, and teach what's required. And then to also know that what you're teaching really has important consequences. Like, I know that the teacher who comes after me in year 4, they're going to need this knowledge that I'm giving these kids now. Or even, as is the case with primary school teachers, one year you might be in year 2 or year 1 and you've been there for a couple of years in a row, and all of a sudden the principal calls and says, now I need you in year 3 or 4. When you go up to year 3 or 4, it's not a totally brand new curriculum that you don't have any background to. You were there with the kids in year 2, you know what they've learned already, and you can start building on it.
Sure.
Yes. Learning progressions, we call it. Yeah.
James, on the other end of the table, hello.
Hello. Yeah, good to be here.
From a secondary perspective then, how does what has been mentioned there by Carl, this idea of the sequential nature of the development of the curriculum in the primary sphere relate to the secondary sphere?
Right, yes. Well, with that strong sacramental focus and the progression that happens through primary school, at year 7, we have an introduction really to the salvation history story of the people of Israel, from the exile through the prophets, through the longing for a Messiah. And that comes to its fulfillment in year 8, where you have an engagement with Jesus, the person, who he was, what he wanted, and how he lived through to his death and resurrection. And the advent of the early church then moves into year 9, where you have a church that has sacraments, which really show us a way into flourishing and a way into understanding our lives as human beings. So in year 9, there's a strong focus on personhood, what it means to be human, and that link to sacraments as that way towards flourishing. And then at year 10, we have a real question of how do we live as a result of these things being true? How are we to live? What's the moral life? What's our engagement with the world writ large? And how then are we sent out to this world that we are as young people? So there's definitely a sense that the curriculum supports a progression in knowledge through the cognitive outcomes across each year level, and also with some degree the affective learning of the links to the students' lives.
I've had cognitive outcomes a couple of times now. So what do you mean by that when you refer to cognitive outcomes?
Yeah, well, we're talking about the knowledge-based learning that the students are developing. So we're talking here about what is stretching our learners to the new learning within the content area that they're studying.
Okay.
So cognitively, they might be learning about Jesus praying at various parts in his life. And then on the affective side, they might look at how does this come home for me as a person who might also feel an invitation to pray.
Sure. And so is there an air of complexity as students progress through this? So by year 10, is it almost more kind of reflective and open to interpretation in some respect?
Well, Kyle might answer that on cognitive
Yeah,
year 10.
it's a good question. When you look at the cognitive outcomes from foundation up to year 10, certainly you'll notice the command terms of the verbs change a lot.
Sure.
So in those early years, you could expect it to be things like students can retell the story of the Annunciation, or students will be able to describe 2 to 3 ways to pray, that sort of stuff. As you journey further and further up the year levels, you are going to encounter more of those describing, explaining, analysing. So, for example, in year 8, in one of the units that James wrote about the parables, they might try to analyse the parable of the great banquet or dinner to sort of look at it in the sense of the overall arching, reaching, kingdom of God that envelops everyone. So you do have that complex building of cognitive outcomes from year to year. Sometimes you'll end up in year 10 and you might need to take it down a notch. It could be the first time they've come across a concept like, say, for example, the principles of social justice. And so we might then take it back a step and say, well, students need to be able to just define them before they can engage with them a bit deeper as well. Yeah. We are looking for that overall increase in complexity. There are lots of parts that are actually quite precise, like define the following themes of social justice, great. But then you'll have other ones that are paired with, which say things like students will be able to explain how some of the themes of Catholic social teaching are applicable to their school life.
And then in terms of trialling this, so we've had some time now to actually have some schools utilise some of this curriculum. Carl, what's that been like so far?
It's been an extraordinary experience to trial curriculum. We took a pretty bold choice early on in the piece to not lock ourselves away, write a curriculum, 2 years later, open it up and say it's done, but actually to go out to schools on the way. Our first trial started term 3, 2025. We were probably finished about 25% of the curriculum by that stage.
Right.
We'd done a lot of foundation, we'd done a lot of year 7, a lot of year 8, and we opened up to schools to say, come and pick it up and run with us. That first day we brought them in, we had 75 teachers come into the office and explored this curriculum. There was 4 units in foundation they took away and ran with in schools, and 1 in year 7, 1 in year 8, which is fantastic. And they all came back with really exciting feedback.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most positive things was they were impressed at just how ambitious the knowledge is. They were saying things like, it's great that I can go back to my students and I know that my students can learn this and they will learn this, and it's really powerful. We had a great story come from a teacher where their prep kids, after a unit on prayer and foundation, participated at Mass at their local school celebration Mass, and the parish priest was blown away, but how the prep kids were all engaged and involved, and that was fantastic.
Amazing.
On the other side of the coin, they also ran into a couple of little hard spots. Like there's this great unit in year 7 on the Exodus, Moses journey through the desert, crossing the Red Sea, the coming of the Sinai covenant. And the teachers went out and they started teaching it and realized because this was like unit 4 of the year and they were teaching it out of sequence, there was a lot of stuff they hadn't dealt with yet about like how the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is oral history passed down from generation to generation. Their kids need a little bit extra to start with before they could really get stuck into the story. Sure. So they went back and had to do a little bit of early teaching on how to understand Scripture before they dived in again. So it's been that sort of stuff of like teachers saying, hey, this is really good, really ambitious. We think that students are going to need extra support here and here. When you get down the line of implementation, that maybe you want to think about. And so sometimes it will be Kath and James and the team going back and sort of looking at those early units and making a tweak to make sure students get that key knowledge before they get there.
Yeah, brilliant.
Or just even putting a plan in our implementation for the years to come to say, this is what teachers are going to need support for.
Sure. So valuable both from a strength-based perspective, but also looking at some of the barriers that have been reached already. Yeah, amazing. And I suppose then, do you know what's required from here in terms of professional learning, or is it more just making some tweaks to the design of of what you've got in place?
Certainly professional learning is a big part of it,
Yeah.
and we are making tweaks and changes. The curriculum writers, as they go through and they receive feedback, they review all their work. We have a really long review pathway. It's probably the most complicated that I've ever seen. We have the Religious Education Reference Group, who's set by the Archbishop, who actually review the units of work. So they give us crucial feedback, and then it goes to schools and they give us feedback. So we're constantly tweaking. That second part, which is going to make up a big proportion of our future implementation at professional learning, is a big part of it. I think about Lee Schulman's PCK, pedagogical content knowledge, and there's going to be a lot of stuff in our curriculum where teachers will need content knowledge support. So there's content in the units of work, but we've also got opportunities to provide them with some really stable content knowledge professional development.
Lovely.
Let's say, for example, you're coming into year 4, you've been a year 2 teacher for a long time, and now you're going to be teaching Eucharist. Where can I go from Max to access some off-the-shelf, ready-to-run content support? But there's also ongoing pedagogical support. One of the great things we heard from teachers in our trials is, especially at our Max schools, they really love Vision for Instruction. And they say, well, how can I use Vision for Instruction to teach this? But also, how can I know when I can just come off the side of it? Because religious education is not just about knowledge acquisition. It's also the potential for an encounter. It's reflection as well.
Yeah.
So where do I have room to move in there? So we'll be looking at that as well. So things like, how can we skill teachers in opening up discussion on Scripture? That's a valuable pedagogical approach for Foundation to Year 10. So we'll be looking at that as well.
Brilliant.
Alongside things that are really specific, like how could I teach this parable or that Scripture?
That's fantastic. So I know it's very early doors, do we know at this stage, if I'm a teacher, where I could find that? Eventually, will that be on Kevin? Will that be a learning module? Will that be in person?
Look, it's going to be a mix of things.
Yep.
It's definitely, we're looking at using Max Learn for some of those off-the-shelf self-service options. So, if you just need a 30-minute, warm-up for your next unit, you can go to Max Learn and be able to pick one off the shelf. But then other ones like those more specific pedagogical ones, or the content knowledge ones that are a bit trickier, we're listening to the feedback that comes from our trial-based learning teams and saying that's where we're going to need to put in some really specific supports for schools, either as, cluster schools, you might be having, 5, 6, 7 cluster schools at once, or a particular school that says we just need really big, strong support to implement this.
Amazing. Lots to look forward to.
There is a lot to look forward to, yeah.
So James, can you tell us a little bit more than just about the construct of the secondary units of work?
Okay, well, each unit of work is based on teaching and learning sequences. There might be 2 or 3. And within each sequence, there's teacher preparation material that helps the teacher to prepare themselves to teach the critical content. There's also a teacher reflection piece, which is really helping the teacher to reflect, what am I doing when I do this? What does it mean to me for teaching this material? But then within the unit itself, the critical content for learning, reflecting cognitive learning outcomes, and the catechesis and evangelization section reflecting affective learning outcomes, we have a real two-pronged approach of knowledge acquisition for our students, but also reflective space for them to reflect on, how does this link to my life and what meaning could it make for my life? And so really the teachers are able to commend a certain engagement with content while also inviting a reflective space for considering, what does this mean for you as a student? And that respects the religious freedom of the student while also encouraging them and commending that there are things here worth reflecting on.
Lovely.
And so that kind of architecture to each unit of work, which is reflected for every unit across the span of year levels, really provides kind of a safety surrounding the teacher's engagement with the units. Because if they know that every unit has the same structure, they just need to apply it within their particular context, within their particular year level, and take to their students the cognitive and the affective domains. So,
And reduces the cognitive load both on the teacher and the students who know what to expect in terms of that structure as well.
Definitely,
Yes.
yeah.
We've talked a lot about F Foundation all the way through to Year 10.
Yes, yep.
What happens if I'm a young student moving through to Year 11 and 12?
Okay, well, we're really working on that at the moment. We have an expert group that we meet with, made up of practitioners and people who have a particular interest in this field, and we are commissioned to provide a proposal to the reference group by the end of this year around how we might see the senior secondary religious education shaping up. Now, we know that many schools like and use the 2 VCE religious studies units, which are religion and society and text and traditions. We don't expect any of that to change. Those are good units which schools enjoy using. But for the students who are perhaps not doing those units or not doing the VET unit, Catholic Theology and Ministry, we are attracted to the idea of writing a course that might be a school-based course for the students who are perhaps not doing any of those 3 units. What that might look like, we don't really know just yet, but that will exercise our minds between now and the end of the year.
And it sounds like there's appetite for that. I know, having worked in the VCE sphere, I know there is appetite for that unscored vocational
Yes,
side.
there absolutely is. And what's provided at the moment at that level of school-based religious education in senior secondary tends to be sort of quite a smorgasbord where schools are offering all kinds of different things, and there's not much uniformity or commonality. So as I said, we are quite attracted to the idea of writing something that schools might use in that area. Yeah.
There's also one part of that we want to explore a bit more is what support can we provide to schools for students who are doing VC vocational major as well.
Exactly.
That mixes in with
the
2 days out of school a week, one at TAFE, one on the job. They've got different units of competency they have to achieve, and what support a curriculum could provide to them. Could it match up with some of their existing units like personal development skills or workplace skills, that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
See how we can make sure we're really meeting the needs of every student in year 11 and 12 as well.
Great. That sounds really promising. I suppose, Kath, as well, then, beyond what we've discussed in terms of the curriculum design, there's diversity in our classrooms, and there's probably an ever-growing demographic that maybe don't necessarily align with Catholicism to the same extent.
Absolutely right.
What does that mean then for us?
Well, it's different from school to school. Some schools have a high percentage of Catholic students. Others have a much lower percentage. And in some regional schools that I've come across, the percentage of Catholic students might be as low as 25% even. So across the Archdiocese there, that really does depend on from school to school. But we do know that our religious education classrooms have in them children who are practicing Catholics, children who are baptised and confirmed Catholics but don't really have an association with the church. There are also children from other Christian denominations and increasingly children from other religions. We are challenged to provide a curriculum that where every student, every child can feel that they can take part. Now, because we're Catholic schools and we see that our first mission, our first task is to, the church documents are absolutely unequivocal about this. The first task is to tell the good news, to teach the story of Jesus Christ, and then, within the context of God, Christ and the church. So we don't result from that. That's the task that we must do. But we are very, very clear that in every classroom, every child's question, every child's experience, every child's perspective comes into the mix. And so we can learn from each other. We don't abandon teaching about the Catholic Christian tradition in order to teach about other religions. We wouldn't take that on. That's the job of the child's family or faith community. But our teachers know that when they take their religious education class, that every single child is part of the conversation and the learning that goes on.
Brilliant. On that note, thinking about, I suppose, and for our viewers, any questions or if there's any involvement that they can possibly have in terms of this developmental process, we will be leaving Carl's email address in the description. He'll be the point of contact, because there's a lot to unpack there, and I think there's a lot to consume, and I think a lot of promising and very productive curriculum design elements that teachers will be really kind of willing to engage with. So well done for all of your work surrounding that, and Marsha as well, who's not here with us today.
Yes.
So fantastic stuff. What we like to do then before we end the podcast is we like to know what's inspired you in your line of work. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's both. James, I'll start with you on the other side of the table.
Yes, well, we're in Year 9, which I've been working with Kath on. We have a theme of personhood and this whole idea of what it means to be human and what that means for our lives. And one of the first points of call we went to was actually the Melbourne Archbishop Peter Comensoli has written on the role of the profoundly impaired being as human beings, as persons. And one insight I really liked from this book is that people who have a profound disability, their dignity requires that they just belong. We don't have to include them as some kind of bestowing of a gift to them, but by very virtue of being human, they deserve to belong. And that belonging is something that should emanate through all our Catholic imagination.
Amazing. And I know not helpful for anyone listening on podcasts or Spotify, but James, if you don't mind just lifting that book for us, and what is it?
It's In God's Image, recognizing the profoundly impaired as persons.
Amazing. Thank you. Kyle?
I've got a book here today. This is one of my favorite books by Kirshner, Hendrick and Heel, How Teaching Happens, Seminal Works. This lives on my desk at work. Its companion lives at home, the Blue Book. If anyone knows the Blue Book out there, How Learning Happens. It's been a remarkable book, and like its companion, it's just, I love it because it's something I can pick up, and there's 50 odd years here of really strong educational research and literature that's in a palm of my hand. I can flick to the bit I need on, assessment or curriculum development design or pedagogical content knowledge or whatever it is, and it's a trusty companion when I'm thinking about, working with teachers on implementing this curriculum.
And as a system, we're very proud of our relationship with Carl Hendrick as well, of course. And,
yes.
His episode is out already, so please make sure you watch that if you haven't already, to unpack a bit more of how learning happens. And Kath?
Yes, well, when I started to read the educational philosophy of Luigi Gazzani, who is an Italian priest and religious educator who is on the way to canonisation, his educational philosophy sort of gonged in my head because I thought, I needed someone to put the words on what I'd always thought about religious education. And that's where I found Gazzani talking about religious education as the proposal or the presentation of a total vision of reality. So a great deal of what we see in education in this hyper-specialised world of secularisation is that knowledge tends to be fragmented. Gazzani argues that we present the Christian vision of life as a total vision of reality, that we tell the whole story. We don't just tell bits of it. We tell it as a totality, and that in telling it as a totality, we are made ready to encounter this amazing reality of the Christ event in history. So this is his book, The Risk of Education, and he claims in this book that we give our absolute best. We propose the Christian vision of life. We propose it with all the skills and all the knowledge we have, but ultimately we're dealing with people who are free, and the students have the freedom to take what we're offering, to assimilate it into their lives, and to accept or reject it. Nice. And that's the point he makes in the book, that every time we walk into a classroom as a religious educator, we're taking the risk of education, but it's a risk very well worth taking.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's a really promising time. I know you've got a lot of work still to do on the curriculum. We know it's not finished, and we know we're getting closer and closer to that. It sounds like something that teachers are going to pick up and use. It's going to fit into the pedagogical practices of the schools already in their existence, and I think it's going to have a real powerful effect on how we align all of our curriculum alongside religion and really give it the gravitas it deserves. So well done to you and the team for producing that and putting that together.
And thank you for giving us the space to tell you about it. It's really good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you check out our other episodes. We also have a new school spotlight series whereby we're visiting some of our schools and we're really trying to shine a light on some of the amazing work that's being done there. We've got a primary and a secondary video out already, so please do have a watch of those if you're interested. If you want to be involved in the podcast in any other capacity, you want to share your school story as well, you can write into us at podcast@max.vic.edu.au. We've had a great time today talking around the table. I've been Danny Jaber, and so until next time, keep flourishing.